Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to cover FMS form filling guidelines. Now, FMS is one application that you need to do before the CAT is conducted, and that is why you also have to decide whether you're going to apply to FMS or not. And hopefully in this video, you will find an answer to that question because I'm going to share different cutoffs for different categories and the last couple of years data, specifically last 3 years. And then we'll also talk about the entire application form. So how to write the SOP, I'll be sharing some tips regarding that. So make sure that you watch this particular video till the very end. Let's get started. And the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the important points. Now, application deadline is 26 November. And as you can see clearly, this is before the CAT is conducted. So you have to make a decision right now whether you're going to apply to FMS or not. The second thing is, what is the eligibility? So you need to have bachelor's degree with minimum 50%. That is what they have given. And this is for the general category. But if you belong to any of the other categories, so whether it is SC, ST, OBC, EWS, PWD, and the other categories that they have, in that case, the requirement is 45%. Final year students can also apply. So if you are in the final year, you are eligible to apply. Okay. Now, the other thing to note is the selection process. Now, when you look at FMS selection process, there is higher weightage when it comes to the initial shortlist on the VRC section. So this is the shortlisting part. What you see is VRC has 40% weight and DILR and QA, they have 30% each. So they arrive at a composite score and that score is calculated, which is the weighted average of the three sections. Now, when you look at the shortlisting, for women candidates specifically, additional 5 marks are given. So that is one advantage that women candidates have. When you look at the final selection, so now you have been shortlisted. At the selection stage, finally, if you look at the weightages, the weighted CAT score has 50% weight. You're going to have class 10th and 12th, which is 10% respectively. Then SOP is 10%. You're also going to have an extempore, and that is going to be 5%. And the personal interview matters for 15% in the final selection. In the final selection also, additional 5 marks will be given to all the women candidates who appear for the interview. Now, FMS follows roughly 1:7 kind of ratio. So when you look at how many students get shortlisted and then how many get selected, you have 7 students getting shortlisted for the interviews and finally 1 student making it. So that is how they issue the calls as well. Now, if you look at the categories that are available, so when you look at the reservation, the sanctioned seats are 251 and you can see the bifurcation on screen. And then there are the additional seats that you have, so which is PWD, CW, FS and all the other categories that are there. If you belong to any of these categories, the recommendation is very simple, that you apply to FMS. Because typically what happens is, in these categories you don't have a lot of candidates, and it has been observed in the past that a lot of in most of the years rather, that all the candidates who applied in these categories have received shortlist. So if you belong to any of these categories, the recommendation is simple. You make sure that you apply to FMS. And as we talk about the cutoff table, you will understand why I make that statement. Now, these are all the categories. So, of course, it will be a little difficult for you to read this, but this is taken from the FMS brochure. So, if you go to the FMS website, we'll also try and just give you a link in the description from where you can check it, because the details, there are subcategories within the individual categories. For example, PWD, CW, etc. They go from PWD1 to PWD6, CW1 to CW6, and so on. So make sure that you go through the entire document to understand whether you fall in any of these categories or not. Now, when you look at the batch profile, so this data is taken from FMS website itself. 298 students in the 23-25 batch and a 320 in the last batch. So the gender diversity has improved in the last year, so 36% becoming 48%. If you look at the composition of the class, you have a lot of students who come from the non-engineering backgrounds as well. 32% in both the years. So BCom, CA plus MBA, which is BCom, CA and BBA, which is typically the management plus commerce discipline. If you look at IITs, NITs, BITS and DU, that accounts for about 50% of the batch, which is a pretty sizable number. Freshers account for 43% in this year, and the next year it was 54%, so pretty high number of candidates without any work experience. And if you look at the work experience split as well, typically greater than 2 years, you'll find about 13 to 16% of the students falling into this particular category. So it doesn't really matter whether you have work experience or not. I think you should definitely go ahead and apply if you fall into the typical cutoff range. So if you're expected to score more than a certain percentile, which we will talk about, you should definitely apply to FMS. Now, this is what the cutoff table looks like. Now, this looks like fairly complicated, but you should just focus on the data for your individual category. That is number one. The second thing that I was telling you about, right, which is 1:7. So if you look at how many seats are there versus how many candidates get shortlisted, that is 1:7. So if you look at this, this is not a percentile or this is not scaled score. What they do is they arrive at a composite score. Now this composite score is summation of score in the section, then the weightage, but as we saw, right, 40% for VRC and 30% for the other two sections each, divided by maximum marks for the section. So if the number of questions in a particular section change, it will have an impact on the composite score. Even if the difficulty of the paper changes a lot, it will have an impact on the composite score, right? And they finally round it off to 3 decimal, and then that is what they use for shortlisting, okay? So if you look at the last 3 years, you will see that the general category cutoff has gone up, but you also need to note that from CAT 23 to CAT 24, CAT 23 was a 198 marks paper, CAT 2024 was a 204 mark paper, right? Because you had 2 additional questions in the DLR section. So that is obviously something that will impact the cutoff as well. The second thing that happened is CAT 24 was a relatively more accessible paper compared to CAT 23. Because of which there was a general increase in terms of the cutoffs, and that is why you see that the CAT 24 cutoffs have gone up compared to CAT 23 cutoffs for FMS. So you'll see typically if you look at the math, anywhere between 3 to 6 marks composite score improvement is what has happened. Now what you need to also understand is typically for CW, as I mentioned, CW, WT, WNT, these are the categories where all the candidates get shortlisted, because you may not have enough number of candidates applying in the first place. See, their plan is to shortlist 42 students, but let's say there are only 35 students who have applied, right, in that particular category. Then all of them will get shortlisted, correct? So that is why even in CW, there are categories like CW 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 where everybody got shortlisted. CW 5, for example, in this year had a cutoff. CW 6 had a cutoff. In this year, CW 5 had a cutoff. So you never know, and that is why if you belong to CW or WT or WNT categories, you should definitely apply to FMS. Okay. Now the question is again, should you apply based on some sort of assessment as to what percentile you're going to get on the CAT day? Because see, this is composite score and this will happen post the CAT result. Right now I have to decide whether I should apply to FMS or not, and I can only do that if I do a little bit of back calculation and go through past cutoff data to understand what has happened, let's say in the last 2-3 years, and I will use that as a basis to decide whether I should apply this year or not. So when you look at the typical percentile ranges, right, and again I've given a disclaimer that this is based on past data. It does not guarantee anything. We don't know exactly what will happen this year. So the cutoffs can always change because they don't give percentile based cutoffs. So that information is not available. That is why you have to use this as some past data analysis and use that to decide whether you should apply or not. But don't base your entire decision on this one parameter. You think of your aspiration, your potential to score in the CAT, because let's say you could be somebody who is, let's say, currently at about 94, 95. On the CAT day, it may happen that you end up getting a 99 percentile. So that is why also factor in a lot of other parameters before you decide whether you should apply or not. So general, if you are somebody who is estimated or expected to get a 98.5 plus percentile, I think it's worth applying, because on that day you might end up hitting a 99 percentile as well. Females, it should be 98, because see, females get 5 marks extra, and because of that females will have a slightly lower cutoff compared to males. So if you look at across categories, that is what is going to happen. If you are an SC candidate, estimate or expected to get a 92 plus percentile, 92.5 plus, you should consider applying. The same data for female would be around 88 percentile. For ST, it would be about 83.5 for males and 75 for females. OBC around 96 and 94. EWS about 96, very close to OBC, and female also around 94, 95 percentile. So I would say these numbers, you can also reduce them a little bit, maybe by about 0.5 or 1 percentile, and use that as the benchmark and then apply. Okay, so even if you are, let's say, estimated to get, let's say, a 93 percentile, you're an OBC candidate, female, I think you should apply and see what happens, right? Because ultimately, how you will perform on the D-Day, we don't know. So right now, basis your SIMCAT scores, basis what you're going to do in the remaining time, you can take a call. Okay. For other categories, PWD, I would say about 85 plus for males and 75 plus for females is a decent number to consider. For CW 126, WT 124 and WNT 124, the guideline is very simple. You apply if you belong to any of these categories. For orphan, again, the year-wise data was a little bit difficult to find because in some years you have data points that are coming in some years not. But about 95 plus, if you get as a male orphan, I think it's worth applying, and 85 plus if you're a female candidate. Does that mean that if you're somebody who belongs to these categories, let's say scoring very close to these numbers but not consistently, should you apply or not? I think rather than regretting that decision at a later point of time, it is worth applying, right? Because the fees also when it comes to application is not very high. For general candidates, I think it's 1,000 rupees. If you belong to some of the other categories, it will come down to as low as 350. So I think it's worth a shot rather than regretting that decision at a later point. Okay. All right, now let's start filling the actual form. Okay, so far whatever we discussed was regarding FMS and the past cutoffs and whether you should apply or not. Now, having made up your mind that, okay, I'm going to apply, let's understand what all things are there in the actual form. So you start on this particular page, which is fmsduadmissions.in, and the initial part is very, very simple and straightforward. You just mention your applicant name. The course, there are three options there. There are some part-time programs also that are listed, but I'm guessing everybody watching this video is for the full-time. So you select MBA full-time, which is the first drop-down option. Put your email ID and your mobile number. Then you get an OTP on your mobile. You enter that and then your account gets created. So this is the next screen that you will see that your registration has been completed. It will display your email ID, your mobile number, and then you can click here to log in, because on your mail you will get your application number and your password. So using these two, you have to log in back to the portal. Now once you log into the portal, this is how the dashboard looks. So you have different sections, very limited sections. First is profile, education and experience, right? These are the only three sections that you have. Currently, it is not showing me anything. It is just showing me 1,000 rupees that I need to pay. And then I will start filling the actual information. Okay. So if you look at, let's go to the next page. So here you will see personal details, right? So in personal details, or sorry, rather than that, let me cover the course details first. So in course details, you will see MBA full-time, and there you have to enter your registration number. So the registration number, which is the CAT registration number, you have to enter it and put it again. Once you do that, there is a follow-up question that have you applied to FMS before? It is a yes/no question. If you had applied, let's say last year or the year prior, you can mention the details. If you're applying for the very first time, you just have to say no. Then the personal details section, you have the applicant name, which will be auto-populated, and you have date of birth that you need to mention, then gender, the mobile number, alternate mobile number and email. These are optional questions. If you have it, you can submit it. Otherwise, you can skip through this part. Nationality, you will have to select the appropriate choice. Moving on to the next section, which is parents details. So in parents details, you have father's name and father's occupation, mother's name and mother's occupation. That's it. The category details is of course the important section here, because this will determine whether which category you eventually get considered in. So make sure that you fill this properly. So caste category, so general, EWS, NCOBC, whichever category you belong to, you can select it here. If you belong to PWD category, yes, then PWD subcategory question will be asked. Otherwise, you can select no. So whatever is applicable to you, you select yes or no. And depending on what you have selected, there will be follow-up questions. So if you say yes to CW, which subcategory of CW are you talking about? Okay, so that you will have to fill. And then final question is orphan, yes or no. Once you're done with this, you have the next part wherein you have correspondence address and permanent address. Again, a very simple thing that by now you have done multiple times, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. And then the photograph and signature. Photograph and signature, interestingly, you have very limited file size. So it's 25 KB. So the past photos that you may have used or signature files that you may have used for some of the other exams may not even work. You'll have to use picresize.com, which I had to do to reduce the file size and then upload, right? So you will have to do that because the file size is very small. So once you upload your photograph and signature, you will be able to see it, make sure that all the alignment and everything is fine, and then you can proceed. Now this is a section which will take most of your time, because you have to write a statement of purpose, and this is 1000 characters. Okay, so you cannot just go on and on. This is 1000 character word limit. Experience details is what you'll have to mention, extracurricular activities that you have been a part of, and finally list of academic honors, prizes, scholarship, and any other details that you want to share. So this section will need some thinking, especially the statement of purpose. What I would recommend you to do is fill the experience, extracurricular and academic honors first, so that you have the entire list that you are going to use to eventually write the SOP, because even in your SOP, these are the themes that are broadly going to appear. So let's talk about SOP. Now in SOP, these are the 4 themes that you should be covering, right? The first theme is going to be overview of your academic or your professional background. The second theme is going to be your extracurriculars, position of responsibility, hobbies, co-curricular, extracurricular activities, and all of that. Theme 3 is going to be your career goals and why do you want to do an MBA at this point of time. And finally, theme 4 is going to be why you want to do it from FMS, right? So you have to write and answer the statement of purpose, which is true to who you are, right? So be honest and then write it. A lot of students are going to use ChatGPT, which is like the natural tendency now to go to help, to go for help. But I would suggest that you do the first draft on your own, right? Because otherwise it is going to feel very indifferent, right? So I would say that you write the entire version on your own. The final thing that you have, which is basically fixing grammar and punctuation and things like that, that is where you can use ChatGPT or any sort of AI that you want to use. But otherwise, do pretty much the entire writing on your own. That's the best recommendation that we can offer. But I've given a sample SOP. Again, most of it is covering the themes that we have mentioned, right? So you start with, okay, what was like the backdrop, right? So what's the history that you have had? So you did electrical engineering, telecom engineering, whatever it may be, from XYZ college. Then after your graduation, what did you do? So you joined somewhere as a software engineer, then you decided to move to sales. Then as a business development manager, you got some sort of achievement because you were recognized. Then outside work, what do you do, right? Which is basically your hobbies, interest, etc. In the short term, what is it that you want to do, which is why you want to do an MBA. And then you close with, okay, with FMS, right? So why do you want to do it from FMS with its distinguished faculty and things like that. Now, a lot of students will write similar things, and that is why you have to make it personal. So you have to share your own story in your own words, and it has to be impactful. Okay, so keep that in mind while you're writing your SOP. If you are an IMS student, you can always reach out to whoever your mentors are at the center or the online mentors. Just show a quick draft to them, because this is just 1000 characters, just a WhatsApp or a Telegram message away. So you can send it to them, ask them for a quick review, and then only you submit it. Now, coming to extracurricular activity, just some pointers that you should keep in mind is you can also include co-curricular activities if you want to add. Okay, so absolutely no problem there. It can be a combination of both co-curricular and extracurricular activities. So if it is, let's say, sports, dance, theater, singing, whatever it is that is applicable to you. Now, you can also mention internship if you have done any, because there's otherwise no scope to talk about your internships. So you can still talk about that. Things like academic projects ideally should not be mentioned, but then if you don't have too many things to talk about, it is still worth mentioning. Okay, so take a call basis how many things you have. Now, volunteering activities can also be included. So you can talk about, let's say, any NGO or social work that you may have done. And finally, if you're a working professional, again, you can talk about such things, right? So maybe in some CSR activities you have participated, you can talk about it. So typically there's no limit to what you can write, right? So you can cover a lot of things that you have done outside the curricular activities that you have done, including co-curricular and extracurricular activities. The only thing to keep in mind is to prioritize, right? Because it's not going to be a laundry list that you share, but something that is meaningful, something that is impactful. Use numbers wherever possible, use action verbs wherever possible to make sure that your writing sounds impactful. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, regarding academic honors and prizes, again, you have to prioritize. So you cannot be just be writing the entire list. Also, from school, if you are planning to write a few activities, we would typically say that if you have done it after 9th grade, it is still okay to mention. Anything prior to that can also be mentioned if it is, number one, very significant, Number two, if you do not have too many recent achievements to talk about, okay, so take a call. Include only the top 3 to 5 achievements, right? So you again don't have to write everything that you may have done, and as long as these are different things, right? So if let's say you have excelled in a particular sport, then writing 3 things related to that sport is not going to make sense. So ideally you can choose maybe 1 or 2 out of that, the ones that are extremely important, and then mention only those and decide to ignore the third one. Okay. Now, when you look at the achievement level, right? So also write whether it was at, let's say, state level, district level, national, whatever be the case. Now, academic achievements and for working professional, workplace awards can also be mentioned. So let's say if you got employee of the month, you can also mention that, or employee of the quarter, employee of the year, or any specific, let's say, recognition that you may have received, you can talk about it. Use action verbs. List of action verbs is very easy to find. You can find it anywhere. Just search for list of action verbs. Stanford GSB has also a list that you can look for. I'll again try and give a link in the description if you're unable to find it. Or you can just ask AI for action verb list, right? So rather than just writing I did this, I did that, etc., you use action verbs for impact. And exclude participation only events, because a lot of times we participate in, let's say, festivals. Those are not achievements, so you should ideally not mention it. And then the final thing, which is work experience section. So even in work experience, keep in mind that you have to go in the reverse chronological order. So whatever is the recent one, you write that as the first thing. Now here you have to mention the organization name, designation, etc. Though there is a separate section where you list down your work experience, it's better that you write it in the beginning and then talk about the roles and responsibilities that you had. Now you have to highlight key responsibilities that you have done, any achievements that you may have from your work, so you can write that. Any skills that you may have gained, like teamwork, problem solving, communication, and stuff like that, you can mention these as well. In addition to that, if you can talk about, say, cross functional projects that you may have been a part of, mention that. And again, use action verbs, right? So that remains standard for all the writing that you do, that you use action verbs to make things important, right? And easy to read, because rather than saying, let's say I gave a particular task to somebody, you can always write delegated, right? So there's always a better way to put something that you have done. Now the next part, so once this section is done, you move to the next section, which is educational information. This is pretty straightforward to fill because they've given a single table. You have these columns where you have to mention the data. So for example, for 10th, you start with, okay, what is the school, the name of the school, the university, the name of the degree. So here some fields are not visible, which means you can't write anything there, because in 10th there's no degree as such. For 12th, for example, you can write HSC here, right? Then subjects, again, at some places it will not be visible, but let's say you did 12 science, so you will be writing science here. Year of passing is what you can write. Then the next is marking scheme. So whether you had marks or CGPA, you can select that, enter maximum marks or CGPA, obtained marks or CGPA, and finally the percentage of marks. Now the conversion formula, the way it is for even CAT, you have to use the conversion formula which is given by your university or board. And here they have given candidate shortlisted for interview need to produce copy of CGPA to percentage conversion table at the time of interview. So whatever conversion formula you use, you have to give a copy of that particular formula. Okay, so be careful while filling this information. But again, because you have filled it for a lot of other tests, etc., I think this data is ready with you. So you can fill it on your own pretty quickly. Then comes work experience. So here you have to give details of the name of the organization, designation, from date and to date, and you have to upload work experience certificate. Now some students might have this question that I don't have a work experience certificate with me, right? So what do I do, because I'm currently working and I don't want my organization to know. Now in that case, what you can always do is the offer letter that you have received, right, and the last salary slip that you have, you can combine these two in a single file and you can upload that as well. The other thing is, in some organizations, you can always reach out to the HR and then they give you a proof that you're currently employed in this particular organization. So which is called proof of employment. So if you have that, you can upload that as well if your organization is not going to give you a work-ex certificate. But if you have worked in the past, of course, you must have received a work-ex letter from the organization. You can simply upload that. I think the file size is 2 MB, that is the limit that you have. Now, once you add that experience, it will calculate the experience in days. So you don't have to write it, it will auto calculate. If you have more experiences, you can always add. So there's an option to add more companies as well. So let's say you have 2 or 3 work experiences, you can mention all of them. Once you're done with all of this, you are pretty much done with the form, the entire form. The last thing that is remaining is the payment. So it will show you this particular screen on the payment page. It will show you the amount that you need to pay. For different categories, this will be different. Total fee paid is 0 because right now I have not made the payment. So it is showing due amount as 1000. Till I make the payment, I can make changes in my form. So they have clearly mentioned your application has not been submitted, etc. Once payment is done, you cannot change any details. So make sure that you review the entire form at this point of time. Don't be in a hurry. You still have a lot of time for the deadline. So make sure that you go through the entire application, the factual information that you have filled, and of course the SOP, extracurricular, list of awards, work experience, all the details, especially the long answers that you're supposed to write, make sure that you have written them properly. So review the whole thing, show it to your mentors, get feedback from them, and once you are confident that okay, I have done the best that I could have done, then you can make the payment. Once you make the payment, you will not be able to make any changes. Okay, so that's it. Once you also make the payment, make sure that you print the application form and keep a copy of it with you. Okay, so that's it. We have covered the entire thing, the entire application form. I hope this video has helped you, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section. Let me know. I'll try and reply as soon as I can. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Wish all of you all the best, and I'll see you soon. Bye.